work and continue to appreciate the work, because I do think part of what keeps our communities safe and going is the folks that are working. But businesses that are closing oftentimes are closing because of the incredibly thin margins that were shared earlier. So I hope that is being taken into consideration before a decision is made. Thank you.
Thank you. That was our last speaker as far as I see.
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor Lee, why don't you kick us off?
Sure, Mr. Mayor, and I'll be brief because we've got a lot to get to, and I think I've made my feelings known on this point quite a few times. Quite simply, if the workers in our grocery stores, in our hospitals, did not go to work every day and put themselves at risk every day very early without adequate protective equipment, we would still be in the thick of the pandemic. I say we would still be in the thick of the pandemic, but I gotta, really highlight to everyone here today that though our vaccines are rolling out, this pandemic is not over. Resurgences are happening, as Councilmember Erickson mentioned earlier, in Europe, and resurgences are happening in different states around the country. We don't know where this will take us. We don't know when the next pandemic will come, but we know in each situation, we will need the professionals in the healthcare industry and the professionals in the food service industry to have our back, as they have for over a year. Now, there's an argument about stepping into the private sector, and I believe, it's not supported by the actions of the over 30 cities around California who have already done what we're proposing to do tonight. There have been legal challenges, but as it references grocery workers, those legal challenges have not held up. The other issue that I think people have brought up is a cautionary tale or something to scare us out of doing what is right, because that's what it is. People try to scare you about doing what is right, is that a number of stores owned by Kroger have closed in the Los Angeles area. And I'm just going to be super honest here. Anyone who hasn't been to a meeting before, I'm sorry. But those stores were closed because they were in areas that were highly low income and where the people have less political power. That's the truth. The Ralphs on Slauson and Crenshaw, the Ralphs and the Food for Less in Long Beach, there are in neighborhoods where corporations know that there will be no political consequences for taking away food access to low-income people who are highly Black and brown and highly immigrant. Fortunately, unfortunately, we don't have that issue here in Culver City. In fact, every time I go to a Ralph's, any of our Ralphs, as a walker, I'm not really sure whether or not I'm going to be hit by a car, because they're always full. They're incredibly full. As we've heard from other speakers tonight, there have been record profits during the pandemic. And as we heard from workers, despite what we've heard from the CEO tonight, all of this extra pay, all of these extra measures taken at Southern California Hospital in particular to really communicate safety really didn't materialize on one hand. Some of them just didn't happen. Those are lies. Others materialized after employees complained for months. They weren't a benevolent thing. that the CEO and the company gave to the employees out of the kindness of their heart. They're things that they were forced to do because the employees were talking to the LA County Department of Public Health or Cal OSHA or other places that really try to mediate between employers and employees to make sure that the working environment is as safe as possible. We've gone through an unprecedented pandemic. The only corollaries are the flu of 1918, 1919, and the Black Plague. This is unprecedented. As someone mentioned before, a lot of us, including us here on the council, have had the privilege of being able to stay home and continue not exactly business as usual, but more or less business as usual. I was actually a whole lot more busy than I have been maybe in my entire life in the last year, but I was able to do all of that business online virtually. I did not have to go into a grocery store. I did not have to expose myself to customers who were both frantic, stressed, and many of whom refused to wear a mask on a daily basis. I did not have to see my fellow employees get sick and some of them die. The LA Times ran a story about a worker who died and contracted COVID at Southern California Hospital a few months ago. There have been numerous stories about workers who contracted COVID at grocery stores here in Culver City and around the county. These people are in danger. What we're doing is not revolutionary either. Los Angeles City, many other cities around California and around the country have taken the same steps. And I think we are as empathetic as those cities. I think we are as understanding. And frankly, I think we are as thankful for the sacrifices that these people have made for over a year. As the rep from UFCW mentioned, most of these hero pay ordinances are 60 to 180 days. So what they're asking for is not compensation for the entire length of the pandemic, which is what they deserve. What they're asking for is a bump in compensation for a few months. As vaccines roll out, we will be safe, but some people will be unwise and people will still continue to get infected and die for many months. These people have kept us alive, both the healthcare workers and the grocery workers. They've delivered food to our homes. They've tolerated our bad attitudes when we've gone to grocery stores, and they've treated us when we've contracted the virus. I don't think there's a whole lot of arguing against this that you can make in a substantive way. We don't have very many stores in Culver City. Not very many stores will be affected. I think within that context, the argument around stalling economic recovery is false. How so? By taking some of the record profits of some of the companies that have made the most within the last 12 months and dictating that some of that should be shared with some of their workers for a limited amount of time. That's not overreach. That's humanity. And I think that's what we should do. I would have liked to bring, frankly, an ordinance like this before the council earlier when we were in the thick of the pandemic. Because I only went to a grocery store once in the last year. In the last few weeks, I've gone 2 or 3 times since I've been vaccinated. Since I knew I've been vaccinated since September. But the one time that I did go in the thick of the pandemic, it was like a walking nightmare. It was like walking into a bad dream. Everyone you looked at was afraid. Everyone you looked at was stressed, from the workers to the people looking at the same apples you're looking at and wondering if they pick up one that you've been hovering around, if they'll get sick, to the people waiting outside for their healthier family member to finish shopping in the car. Grocery workers had to experience that every day. They went to work almost every day for the last 12 to 13 months. I think what we're proposing right now is frankly insufficient. But I think it's the least that we can do. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Erickson. Oh, you got your double mute on, Councilmember Erickson.
Well, that's better, huh? Yeah. Thank you. I have a great appreciation for everyone that showed up at work during the last 12 months. Absolutely, in all different businesses. In this case, for some reason, staff has singled out just a few specific industries, including a specific company, which I don't think even is something the city should do. We shouldn't go after individual companies like we do here with the Southern California Hospital. For me, that really is bad policy. But you know, and I have a family member who has actually worked on the front line in an ER room the whole time, so I'm very aware of the whole situation. That still doesn't change my basic belief that we as a city shouldn't interfere in the private sector. If there is issues, there are unions. We clearly hear so. They should then deal with this with management. That's how it works in a private sector market. And the other way that we are going into is a socialized labor market, where government sets salaries, and that's really not where I want to go. I don't think that's good for our nation to go down that route. So it's for me, this is on principle a terrible idea. And the whole idea that 30 cities, which I think one of the representatives from the hospital or some other organization mentioned that there was 30 cities in California and the state of Washington who now had signed on and passed legislation like this. Well, that means that there is 2,030 cities who will happen. So, you know, this is not we are not following a major movement at all. This is a little fringe issue if we start counting cities. So I don't think that we should go down this road. And well, I heard from colleagues that, you know, the Ralph stores that are closing were in areas where people didn't have the political class because there was low income areas. Well, Ralph is closing the store at Pico Beverlyville, which is Cheviot Hills. Last time I checked, Cheviot Hills was actually one of the more powerful neighborhoods within LA City when you look at who lives there. So, you know, what happens when you add cost is that the businesses that are borderline, the stores that are borderline, those are the ones that get pushed into negative territory, and those are therefore the ones that get closed down. You know, it's basic economics. That's what business is all about, is that you have to cut your losses, right? So I don't think that it has anything specifically to do with if it's a certain area with people that are making less than others. It's just that the stores are underperforming. And if there is no margin and you take an increase in salary, suddenly you have a negative margin. And no one wants to run a business like that. So, so that's, you know, a sad fact. And I don't like it. And I don't think that we should be part of creating these situations. And I've gone to work every day during the whole pandemic, so I haven't stayed home as other people might have. And our office has been open. We have had skeleton crews rotating in and out through the whole time. I gone to the supermarket several times a week, and I must say I haven't seen people that were afraid. I didn't see any people that didn't wear a mask because you didn't get into the store. There were guards outside, the security guards. They didn't let you in. So this whole assumption that people were going in there without masks is not true for at least the store I go to. And people weren't afraid. There was highs and there were short conversation with social distancing and so on. Maybe that's different because in certain aspects I was a known entity in our city, so I got questions and I got comments and so on when I went to the store. But I wouldn't say that people looked afraid. So that whole narrative is sort of, in my experience, not true. Still, the grocery workers were fantastic. They stepped up, they did their job, and I think that the issue is really between the employees and the owners of the business. And in this aspect, we know that some of the employees has compensated their employees well, and some has compensated less. But it's really not for us to step in. And here is the whole issue is like it's so easy to spend other people's money, right? It's not our money. It's not coming out of our general fund. That would have been a little more honest that we actually took and compensated the people with our money, with our tax money. That would be a more honest discussion. I wouldn't support that, but but to spend other people's money is so easy. And there is this famous quote that the problem with socialism is that at some point you run out of other people's money. And in this case, we've seen stores being closed and people losing jobs and so on. And that's what happens. So I don't think we should step into this. It's not our place to be as a city, not at all. So with that, I will not support this. But I would say that the people who have worked on the front line is fantastic. And as one of my family members who's been right there, treated hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of COVID-19 patients. I know exactly. I've been on the phone and talking with my family member several times a week during this whole time. So I get it. But this is not our place. This is a private labor market issue, and we as a city agency should not step into those. Thank you, Ms. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember McMorrin.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to try to be brief here. I want to start by really thanking the grocery and healthcare workers who I think bravely, listed their names and shared some of their experiences working throughout the pandemic and, sharing their fears and how their families were impacted. I often wish that we didn't have to do that. We didn't have to have folks share their, I don't want to say negative, but share their trauma so that we'll take the issue seriously. But here we are. I am one of the folks who, have been privileged to stay home and order groceries and food. I was incredibly, I'm vaccinated now, so I have a little bit more comfortability visiting the grocery store, but I was one of those folks who was very scared and did not go to the grocery store. Maybe it's because I'm a Black woman and folks of color are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 based on the data. I don't know, but I just know that I was one of those folks who was very fearful to go into grocery stores. And I think fundamentally that this is the right thing to do. I try to take care to center folks who are closest to the pain. And this is a population that has been close to the pain this entire time. They have a lived experience that I don't know anything about. They've, dealt with this virus and more intimately than folks that, so I think that deserves to be, and also it's still here. I mean, we're vaccinated, but we are still, I am seeing light at the end of the tunnel, and obviously we want folks to be vaccinated and, be safe. But we're not through this yet. I think the fact that this ordinance that we're suggesting is for a specific period of time distinguishes it. It allows for their folks to know when there's a start and stop, and I think it really just acknowledges the sacrifices that these folks and their families have made for our community, so that we, could order our Instacart, so that we could, go and get the food and go and be, get our COVID tests, or go and get treated, or have a family member or friend to be treated. So I said I was going to be brief, and I'm still talking, but I think there's a role for local government or government in this issue. I think this is a community issue, and I hope that we will vote to support this hero pay ordinance, so that we're not just calling people heroes, but we're also actually supporting them as well. So, yeah, thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Councilmember Vera.
Thank you, Mayor. So I come from a unique perspective as being a grocery store owner. And I haven't had the privilege of staying home every day. I've been on the front lines, and I've been at that store from 4 in the morning till sometimes 7, 8 at night, serving customers, helping people. I know the issues involved. I firsthand, I know the extra steps that a business has to do in order to survive, in order to keep my employees safe as well as the customers safe. And I gladly do it to be a service to my community. That being said, I know the extra cost that is involved with all of the above that I listed. Not only that, my merchandise has gone up because of supply and demand. It's items that where once one price is another price. For example, my gloves. When the pandemic first started, I was buying a box of 12 for $96. Now that same box is up to $230 for a box of gloves that I'm required to provide to my employees. I guess what I'm getting at is I think the city needs to stay in our lane. And I don't know where this is going to stop. If we're really truly genuine about providing more money to folks, what about then looking within? What about looking at our bus drivers or our public works department? All these folks that were behind the lines making the city run without a glitch, our city hall workers, there was so much going on behind the scene with our police department, our fire department, public works, that these folks didn't have the opportunity to stay home. They went on the front line and they worked their tail off. Many of them got COVID and took the time off, but nonetheless, they were there. What about Cedar Sinai Medical Center on Culver Boulevard? Are they any less special than Southern California Hospital? What about our dentists here that provide emergency calls? It's like the list goes on and on and on. And at what point do we say enough is enough? I mean, I get it from a grocery store worker. I mean, the things that I have to put up with sometimes with customers, but one thing I always provide is a safe workspace for my employees as well as for my customers. If you don't come in with a mask, you're not going to get served. I think through this whole pandemic, I know only twice have I had an encounter which somebody refused to wear a mask. I politely asked them to step outside, and I had somebody service them outside from a safe distance and bring their merchandise there, pardon me, because they refused to wear a mask. One was for a medical issue, and one of them just because she was who she was. But that's besides the point. I think we start getting in onto a slippery slope. There's so many organizations, so many people that work their tails off through this pandemic, that are the unsung heroes. And if we start singling out certain sectors for whatever reason, then are these other folks any less than? I mean, I take care of my employees and I take care of them well, but are my employees any less because I don't employ over a certain amount? I think rather than doing this, let's recognize these stores, these entities that have gone above and beyond. Let's publicly recognize them and show support, throw more business their way for doing, what was a job well done without even being asked. But to do something like this where, at the bottom line, it is going to increase costs because it's just the nature of business. If my products go up or I have to pay more for my employees, then I'm going to charge more for merchandise, and it's just a vicious cycle where, this is the last thing we need in a pandemic, where prices start increasing, availability starts decreasing, hours and wages start decreasing on employees because these folks can't afford a whole lot. And stores are closing. Besides what Councilmember Erickson said, I believe there's a Food for Less on Sunset Boulevard that is closing. That now these folks in these areas are now their stores displaced. So who's suffering more than those community members? I don't want to see that happen here in Culver City. Will it happen? I don't know. It might not, but that's the chance that I don't want to take for the residents of Culver City. We owe it to all the residents of Culver City, not to say that they're not important, but some employees from certain sectors, when in actuality, if that store closes, then who's going to suffer most is the folks that are living in that area, our constituents, those people that elected us to be in this position. So on that, plus many other grounds, I cannot support this. If something else comes up, Mayor, I'll ask to butt in again, but for now, that's it, sir.
Thank you, Councilmember. Thank you, Councilmember. So I don't really think of minimum wages as socialism. I mean, the idea, and this is a minimum wage ordinance. I consider it to sort of set the floor of the market. It serves a beneficial purpose for workers, and it can serve a beneficial purpose for the broader economy. In this instance, the grocery store one is quite easy for me. We ought to match Los Angeles because it is effectively our regional market now, because that's 4 point however many million people. Those workers may not even know whether they work in a Culver City store or a Los Angeles store. We ought to just do it. We ought to match Los Angeles's ordinance, and we should do it post haste. The harder one for me is the hospital. If I'm forced to decide tonight, I'd be inclined to extend that because the point of intervening in the market like this is to go for the low wage, to boost the low wage workers. And SEOU represents largely people. We heard from people who are cleaning the bedpans, keeping the maybe not that. I don't know specifically that they were doing that, but there's they're cleaning, they're doing the respiratory therapy, and so if forced to, I would support it tonight. But I also know that there's some stuff at the state level that that may impact that, and I also know that there are broader issues, and I wonder if there'd be a consensus to defer that decision for a little bit, and to give me and whomever else might want to offer sort of whatever services we can to the parties to discuss a broader solution that includes a bonus for the extraordinary work that's occurred over the last year. Councilmember Lee, the healthcare worker portion was your part. If you're not comfortable with that, we'll push ahead. But I think given the leverage that I've just articulated, it might lead to a better outcome. What do you think, Vice Mayor?
Mayor, could you say more about what's happening on the state level? Because with the line of thought that's being pushed by industry tonight in the context of the vaccine's rolling out. We're gonna be at immunity soon. Why do we need that? I think that argument's only gonna get louder if we wait. And I'm not familiar with the happenings on the state level. So could you expound as much in the context of the information you have about what could potentially happen there?
My understanding is that, well, I know that Al Maritsucci introduced a bill, but that's, unless that were urgency ordinance, that's not really going to affect things. But my understanding is the American Relief Plan made available some money that could be paid directly for essential workers, depending on the state. And I don't want to interfere politically with that. I'm not concerned about, duplicate overpaying, but there may be broader political campaigns that I'm not aware of. And I would not support a long delay of this issue.
I'm still just afraid that, like, in this context, even if we made it wait as little as a month, then there'll be these other arguments like we've heard tonight, and in the context of some of the conditions that we've heard about at Southern California Hospital in particular. And I do believe that it's right to focus on that hospital. That is the Culver City Hospital. That's our official hospital. And as we've heard from many residents on many nights, people avoid it to some degree. Yet people are still serviced there. Low-income people primarily. Workers still work there. They still work in these horrid conditions. I don't know. I'd love to hear from Councilmember McMorrin on that, but I would love to see us move forward tonight. But I would love to hear from Councilmember McMorrin.
Thank you, Vice Mayor and Mayor. I think I am also concerned about bifurcating the two, because I feel like the odds of it coming back and being successful are greatly diminished. So I don't know, Mayor, can you speak a little bit more to your concerns here, or I would like to honor the sacrifice of community members here and workers here. So if possible, I would like to move forward if we're able to.
There's no need to drag this out, because this would have to come back for a second reading, which would allow me to try to accomplish what I want. So if there's a motion, we can move ahead.
Lee moves.
Second.
For staff, if you could specify, I would support the matching Los Angeles and then plugging in acute care hospital healthcare workers.
Yes, exactly as the mayor stated. I moved to pass a hero pay ordinance for our grocery and retail, well, in our pharmacy retail, to include our acute care hospital at Southern California Hospital, Culver City. I think the other question that we haven't really tackled tonight is sort of time frame. And I'm happy to have that wait until the second reading. But if the mayor or the clerk thinks we need to add some specificity to that right now, we can alter the motion.
If the city's attorney can speak to that, I think we'd have to be very precise in order to get a motion back for second reading that would be, or an ordinance back for second reading that could be adopted.
Mayor, to clarify, are you wanting to do this in the ordinary course or bring it as an urgency ordinance? Or because you're talking about a second reading, that's the normal course of doing ordinances, and then there's a 30-day wait until it goes into effect. I see Carol has her microphone on as well.
Well, this is Carol Schwab, city attorney, and that was Lisa Vidra, Senior Deputy City Attorney. I think the concern is, yes, that's a threshold question. Is it an urgency ordinance because you want it to go into effect right away? We'd have to make the findings that I think you probably could because of the existence of the emergency. But I think the concern would be whether a second reading, you would be changing the nature of the ordinance, whether you really could do it as a second reading at that point, because people need to have notice of what your second reading is. But if you're doing it as an urgency ordinance, that's adopted that day. So,
Well, thank you very much. I suspect that we can address that because I don't think we'll get a fourth vote for any form of urgency ordinance here. Is that correct, Madam Attorney?
Yeah, it sounds like,
okay.
Yep.
If you won't
Ms. Schwab-
get one, then,
yeah, it sounds like
if you don't think you'll get one, then I think that would be something different. Then you would just have it go as a regular
As a regular
ordinance.
ordinance,
And then,
right.
And this is Shelley Wolfberg, Assistant to the City Manager. Can you specify what level of workers you want to be included in this draft ordinance?
in my line of thinking, in the context of what the mayor and council member McMorrin mentioned, was just grocery store workers, retail pharmacy workers, and acute care workers like those at Southern California Hospital.
So management and non-management, or non-management only, or?
I'm curious if there is that type of specificity in the Los Angeles ordinance, and if there is, if we could not just duplicate what they did.
Okay, and also regarding the comment that Southern California Hospital is in Los Angeles and Culver City, staff has done some preliminary research in that the hospital is cross-jurisdictional. So the main hospital building is located in Culver City. However, we need to look at the other buildings that are in the city of Los Angeles. So staff is going to try its best to discern this information.
So this may end up bifurcated anyway, it sounds like, but we can do our best. I think
Mayor, let me ask a question. I mean, I know this, but this is like really frustrating on my part. How much really time, resources, and money are we spending from the city coffer to provide something that's going to last a few days? I'm sorry for butting in, but it's just, it blows my mind. I mean, here, I get the concept, I get the intent behind what we're trying to do, but we leave so many other sectors out there that are working their tails off and still not included in this ordinance. I mean, I just don't get it. And I'm sure staff has enough to do this on top of it, and the money and resources that we're spending behind this, when we can focus on things that really would build Culver City up. Like I said, at the end of the day, I don't want to take the chance of having one of our stores closed. Maybe it won't happen. I don't have a crystal ball. Maybe it will. And then what? Now our residents are I don't want to say it, but now they're out of luck because we decided that we want to have this for I don't know. I'm frustrated, Mayor, and it just doesn't make sense. So I'm sorry. That's it for me.
With respect, we take a chance with every decision that we make as elected officials. And three of your colleagues are willing to take this chance. I respect your dissent, and you are completely open to voice that as much as you like. But we can complain about staff time on every single item that we take up. But the long and the short of it is, that's our job, and that's the staff's job.
I don't know that our job is to burn up resources like that, but we all have our own opinions. Thank you.
We do.
okay, colleagues, we've got motion and a second, but it sounds like, I think I want to check in with staff. I think the grocery store one is relatively easy because I think my third vote is to support, to adopt Los Angeles's, unless I see disagreement from Councilmember McMorrin or Vice Mayor Lee. That one's easy. Ms. Schwab, Ms. Vidra, what else would you need to make progress on the healthcare worker part?
So in terms of you're wanting, this is Carol Schwab, in terms of you're wanting to do this as a introduction, you would not be able to change it. I would think maybe you want to just do 2 ordinances right now. That might be a way to do it, and then just the other one wouldn't, because you wouldn't be able to change it at a second reading, the language of the ordinance. So what you could do is adopt the healthcare, and then if something changes by the time of the second reading, you could just withdraw it, or not. It wouldn't go. You wouldn't need to vote for it. Oh.
That makes sense to me. Would that need 2 motions, or could we salvage this motion and just kind of friendly clarification that it's 2 separate ordinances?
This is the city clerk, and I understand that there is a motion and a second to have the return with an ordinance for hero pay for grocery workers and pharmacists. So that's what's on the table right now, unless there's an amendment.
And I believe the mayor's question is, if we amended that slightly, could we do one motion that brings back 2 ordinances before us?
I'm going to ask the city attorney if it then would be returning with a first reading for both ordinances. Would that be correct?
That would be correct, yes.
And it would be to direct the city manager to return with the first reading of 2 ordinances, one for hero pay for grocery workers, and then the second for hero pay for pharmacy retail employees. Is that correct?
I think it's, to specify it's covered hospitals. Hospitals is defined in Health and Safety Code, section 1250A,
Okay. Thank you.
operating within the borders of the city. And then I think essential hospital worker would be people working at a covered hospital, not including any individual performing exclusively managerial or supervisory functions, or any physician or surgeon.
That's specific. Vice Mayor Lee, are you amenable to that?
Yes, Vice Mayor.
I apologize. Okay, so now we have direct the city manager to return with the first reading of 2 ordinances for hero pay, one for grocery workers and one for covered hospitals operating within the borders of the city, and for workers that are not supervisory or management or surgical or physicians.
And sorry, this is Shelley Wolford. One question for clarification. Does that motion include like the custodial folks or, okay. Okay. Thank you.
All right, right, I have a motion by Vice Mayor Lee and a second by Councilmember McMorrin. There we go. How do you vote, Councilmember Vera?
No.
Councilmember McMorrin?
Aye.
Councilmember Erickson?
No.
Vice Mayor Lee?
Aye.
And Mayor Fish?
Aye.
That motion passes. 3 ayes, 2 nay, nay from Councilmember Erickson and Councilmember Vera.
Thank you, colleagues. Tough stuff, but now let's move on to the next one. Madam Clerk, it's 10:30. How many speaker cards do we have for this?
I believe we have 47.
Colleagues, I want you to read here. 90 seconds is not a lot of time. And I know people feel very frustrated when they only get that time, but I also know people have stayed around a long time and would like to get their piece in and are very, some people are very concerned and scared by this motion. Other people are very anxious to get their opinions stated. What do you all think? I don't want to be sole person saying 90 seconds, but